Hello and welcome to Chapter Select at the Movies. After I don't know, how many years has it been now? Year and a half, 2
About a
years?
year and a half, almost. Yeah, I think it was
hmm
the summer of 2021. I think it's been a
Quite the
bit.
hiatus. Yeah, well,
Yes,
people thought we pod faded, but we did not, in fact, pod fade. We're back. It
like
took the
like
first,
the zombies in The Last of Us. We're back.
exactly, it took a new Last of Us, or a new piece of Last of Us content to get us back. The great uniter, The Last of
Yeah,
Us.
right.
Um, So yeah, just we didn't do a kind of a wrap up or what happened last time. I think it really was just a matter of life getting in the way.
100%.
Randy getting a new job, me getting more and more busy. We just couldn't keep it going at that time. But now that we're back, we're going to do things a little bit differently and make it a
Yes,
little bit easier on us. For one issue I've had this past year is I've maybe played 4 video games in the
it's been
course of.
very little. Like Sean was asking for my best of, and I was able to come up with the best or a top 10. But
Mhm.
some of my 10, I may have put 2 hours in. But
Gee,
I had
no,
I had played it, so I counted it.
well, you know my rule. I need to have finished something, which made it
Oh
top
man,
10
the amount of
basically
games I've
impossible.
finished in 2022
Let's see.
is little.
I finished Elden Ring, Bayonetta 3, and Sniper Elite 5. I think those are the games I finished. And then maybe some. Wait, no, that's not. Also, Proteus, the boomer shooter,
Okay,
which is pretty darn good.
I'd have to go back and look at my list. There were games I completely forgot were out there. Stray, I finished
Oh
just because
yeah,
it was
gosh.
very short.
Right, I could have fit that in
Um,
probably.
there was
I
another
was
one that
very
came
excited.
out early. Nobody Saves the World was like a January game,
Don't
so
know
I
anything
had
about
all
that.
year to finish that. It's not much of a story to it. It would not fit the show. But it was a fun little game. Of course, God of War Ragnarok, which you just refuse to come back into.
Well, I haven't
Stepdaddy
played
Kratos is good.
haven't played the previous God of War, so what would be
Yes,
the point?
I agree. We need it. We need to get you back. But no, we are easing ourselves in. I don't think either of us have fully dismissed ever going back to the gaming version of Chapter Select,
I'm
but
sure there'll be something that'll
Chapter
work for
Select
both
at
of
the
us.
movies is an easy way for us to get back into the podcast world, especially with the Last of Us TV show. So we're only dedicating an hour of a week plus however long it takes us to discuss it every week, and it's a little bit easier than trying to devote to
Yeah,
30 hours over a couple of weeks to finish a long storied game. So
and this is
easing
different,
ourselves
right?
back in.
This is we're doing, TV show episodes, and not only does that mean smaller chunks, but also just the quality.
Well,
We're
just
not
have
torturing ourselves right now.
looking back again, it's been a year and a half since we did anything with Chapter Select, and we added Chapter Select at the movies a few months after we started this whole project. So we don't have a ton of things to associate. I want to say we got through 20 movies
hmm
before we went on a hard hiatus. And just looking at our scores,
What's the average rate?
it's not great. And you have to think now that we have seen the first episode of The Last of Us on HBO, some of these numbers seem a little high.
hmm
Would you really rate Ace Attorney slightly under The Last of Us? Because you gave Ace Attorney 8.5. Because again, we were associating it with all of the Resident Evils.
Yeah, we were great on the curve at the time for
Oh
sure.
man, the curves
Uh,
were brutal.
but that one came up. There's been a lot of chatter on Twitter about the fact that, of course, in the promotional material interviews where they're hyping up Last of Us, one of the big talking points is that it's finally broken the video game adaptation curse. And people will counter with, what about Arcane? What about those 2 Sonic movies that I personally don't care for? What about Detective Pikachu that I personally don't care for? um and Ace Attorney also I saw that mentioned quite a bit. as a, oh, actually, this is the first great video game adaptation. So it's not just us, I think, who
Mm-hmm.
rated Ace Attorney pretty highly. Um, but I mean, it's no Last of Us. It's
No.
the thing about it though is Ace Attorney does capture the spirit of that game pretty well.
Yes.
Um,
100%.
so that is something that it has in common with The Last of Us, but it does not capture the aesthetic of the games at all. That's probably something that you would look at the anime series, which is pretty
Mm-hmm.
darn good, by the way. If you wanted to do a TV show, we could do the Ace Attorney TV show.
Oh,
Uh,
we've now opened the door to TV, and
that's
there's good and
3.
bad TV out there. Halo, I'm looking at you.
Oh
Um,
god, I forgot that exists.
I've only watched a couple episodes and I couldn't do it anymore. But
I may
it's
not be
open
the
now.
Yeah, I may not be the right person to judge Halo because I don't care for the games, or at least the game's story. So
Right.
I don't know if that's really something that I need to
It's all
see
right.
adapted.
Paramount Plus did not care about the Halo story either.
Oh, is it? Did they throw out most of it?
I honestly I don't know a ton of the Halo story either, but there's just not a lot of story in that first 3 episodes that
Hmm.
I watched of Halo. It was Mandalorian light
Right.
and not very entertaining. But that's what I think is really interesting. Again, we watched 20 movies in our first run of this show, and I would bet that if you go back, we probably said multiple times, it's like, did they play the games? Like, okay,
Hmm.
cool, we have the name of the video game and maybe a character name. I'm looking at the Paul W.S. Anderson Resident Evils where they're like, well, our movies aren't going to follow the games at all, but we have the character names thrown in. It only took, bringing the actual director of the game in with another fantastic director to
Hmm.
put it into TV form and follow the beats of the actual story of the video game to make a good video game adaptation.
And not just the beats. I mean, we'll get to that as
Oh
we get into
God.
the set
Yep.
pieces. But I was pretty astounded by how well just entire sequences, like almost down to the cuts
Hmm.
and the framing and everything. Which you look at it. If you take the history of video game adaptations out of it entirely, if you
Yeah.
take the curse out of it, you look and say, "Oh, the really cinematic prestige video game makes for a
Hmm.
really cinematic prestige TV show." Well, duh, but it is pretty unprecedented. Even, we've had the director of the games doing, Chris Roberts did Wing Commander.
Hmm.
He adapted his own game and
Right.
didn't come anywhere close. So, the fact that this is so on point, I actually think we're going to be at a little bit of a dearth of things to discuss because it's just going to be, oh yeah, this part, yeah, that was just like it was in the game. That was great. Oh yeah, this part, oh that worked perfectly. You know,
Actually, do you want to get into a little bit of a debatey section right off the bat? Because I
if you
think I
want to.
might have a section to debate with you. Though, again, it is very much praise,
The
and it's to how
Mhm.
good Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann have adapted the opening section of The Last of Us with this first episode. And again, I I know there's a ton of podcasts out there that have reviewed this. And actually, before we get fully going, I think we need to set our own ground rules.
Mhm.
Obviously, we're spoiling the first episode of The Last of Us, but is the rest of the game
Yeah,
untouchable right now?
we
We're just going to
shouldn't
stick
talk.
with this.
I mean, I assume that anybody who's watching this is going to be familiar with the game, but just in case,
Yeah.
I
Well,
don't think it'll.
my mom watched the first episode. She knows very little
Oh, I
about the game. She
definitely
knows
know
they
people.
exist. So,
I
so
know
it's, yeah.
people who are coming in who are just like, "Yep, this is like on the level of early Walking Dead," which to me is way better.
Yes.
But you definitely there is just an audience out there for zombie stuff that are not gamers.
Hmm.
So the fact that this is like a high quality HBO zombie show,
Hmm.
probably going to be some, maybe not our audience, but there's definitely going to be people.
There. All right. So
I think
yeah.
there's
So
probably plenty of
spoilers.
people who.
Spoilers for the episode we talk about. We're gonna do our best not to delve into farther into the game as best as we can. With that said, I'm gonna see if I can maybe get a debate with you. Maybe you agree with me,
Okay.
but I believe the opening section of the TV show is put together in a better way than it was in the actual video game. I
I agree.
think the TV show improved on the storytelling of
Oh
the
yeah, they
video
made
game.
some very smart choices. Like I really
Mhm.
like expanding on the daughter,
Yep.
uh, giving us basically a longer prologue that is from the daughter's perspective,
Mhm.
and not having it be. I mean, I forget if there's. I think there might have been one scene in the video game of like her in the living room.
Yeah,
That's
so in the video game, it basically the Sarah section is built to give you a tutorial of how some of the buttons work and get
right.
yourself
It's
going with
short.
the movement of the game. And then you're just walking around the house, and then the neighbor comes trying to burst through the glass door, and then your dad shows up, and you go through all that.
Right.
You kind of get a little bit of the relationship between father daughter, but I think following Sarah through the town and going down and actually seeing her get her dad's watch
Getting the
fixed,
watch,
or
which of course is going to be an important thing. It does a much better job
Mhm.
setting up everything, and also setting up, who Joel was before the zombie apocalypse happened. We get to spend more time with everybody, which I liked. I liked seeing
Oh
the
yeah.
school scenes,
Hmm.
all that stuff. I thought was a really good addition. So you don't, with the video game, I understand that you're going to get into the big event as soon as possible. You
Hmm.
want stuff to
Yeah.
happen. But in long form TV, you have more leeway there, and I think they
Hmm.
took really good advantage of that.
Yeah, it was. I think the difficulty with Neil Druckmann and the way the games work, because unless your name is Hideo Kojima, you understand that you need to allow your gamer to, actually play your game every so often. Kojima is very much known for, okay, I'm going to give you 45 minutes of just straight exposition and story, and then you might be able to play my game a little bit. And then I'm going to have another long cutscene here and there. With The Last of Us, they knew it was all right. We have to give you the controller every couple minutes to keep you engaged with our game. Here, it's like, you know what? There's no controller. We can dive into the Sarah story. And the fact that that whole opening section took, what, 30 minutes or so and really kind of broke it down. We as gamers knew what was going to happen with Sarah,
Hmm.
and we knew the end result was where it was going, but still they did a great job of connecting us with that character, especially with the neighbors. I think it was an even smarter choice to have it be the old grandma neighbor
Hmm.
that gets infected, which kind of really shows what the cordyceps can do to a human, where she can't move at all with herself. Cordyceps take over. All of a sudden, she's running around like she's 22 years old,
Right. She's
but
the puppet.
obviously has zero control over her body.
Hmm. Yeah. That also, the one thing we should talk about, the one thing that they've changed, which is that the virus doesn't seem to be airborne
Hmm.
in this version, and so that's definitely down the line. There are big sections of especially Last of Us Part Two, where that's an important aspect of the story, and some big set pieces. So they'll be making some changes there in the future.
Hmm.
It hasn't really affected very much in the story so far that we've
No.
seen, but it is funny. Every now and then they'll still do like a shot of like dust particles,
Hmm.
or things are that we associate with the aesthetic of Last of Us, but it doesn't have the same meaning anymore. Again, because in the game it meant like, oh look, it's in the air, whereas here now I guess it doesn't mean anything. It's just a cool, moody shot or a reference
Hmm.
to a shot from the game or something.
Yeah, I'm very curious why they went that direction. I have no problem with it. I know in the game it kind of just helped show that Ellie is immune because she didn't have to put on the mask, and you did. Maybe it's just we don't want to cover our actors' faces, or the recording of the
Hmm.
audio might have been a bit more difficult. And there,
I
like you
mean, you
said, there's only
can.
one section of this first episode where it would have affected in the game, where they see the clicker growing on the wall.
Yeah.
And usually at that section, they're like, oh crap, we got to put our mask on. And my girlfriend, who was watching it with me at the time, even said, is like, well, it's in the air, right? So why aren't they putting on their
Hmm.
mask? And I'm like, well, just wait, because it happens in the game, and they never did. But twisting it that way just so they don't have to put masks on every episode, which they would have had to because it happens all the time. I'm fine with it.
Yeah, it's probably that. It's probably not covering your actors' faces so much.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, that's usually, how many movies have we seen that in? The
Yeah.
Judge Dredd with Stallone, and there's so many examples
Well,
of like
just
masked characters.
Pedro and the Mandalorian.
Yeah, well, but there it was like they were kind of trying to stick to it for a while
Hmm.
to actually make it a big deal when he takes his mask off.
Right.
But yeah, it's definitely a thing. So that makes sense. I wouldn't be. I think you can ADR anything, so wouldn't be so worried about dialogue recording. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, it just means that they have a little bit more leeway, I think, with what they can do. Also, where they're not so um, tied down by just having to worry about the airborneness of it all the time.
Hmm.
And again, it doesn't, since the real monster in The Last of Us is man. It
Hmm.
doesn't really matter for the overall drama all that much.
Right. So before we get into, the whole new world and the 20 years later, well, one other change that they made really was just the timing of everything. So The Last of Us, the actual game, was set on the original section was set on today's day, and then it gets pushed 20 years
Mm.
in the future. What did you think of it going 20 years in the past and it being 2003 when everything happens, and then it's 2023, today's date is when, the actual Last of Us game or main story takes place?
I don't really have a strong opinion of it either way. I mean, technology-wise, it doesn't matter all that much. It
Hmm.
just means that you don't have modern smartphones and stuff like that around. Though I guess most of that stuff would not be working anymore 20 years later
Right.
anyway. I really don't think it matters. Um, I think it was just a way of having it be set in today's time, have it feel more timely or more relevant.
Hmm. Yeah, I
Uh,
think it was a lot of, hey, we went through a pandemic. Now just watch if it got worse.
right.
Kind of
Well,
a thing.
I'll admit it's been. This is a caveat for this entire show, which is I've not actually played The Last of Us since it came out. I played a little bit of it when they did the remaster, but
Hmm.
it's always hard for a remaster to compete with whatever new games are around at the time. Where it's like, yeah, I could be playing Last of Us slightly prettier edition, or I could be playing something new.
Hmm.
So I just never got around to it past like the prologue, as
Which
far
is
as the
why they
remaster
came
goes.
out with part one last year. So for all of us that then watch the show and go, "Oh my god, the show's so good," they're like, "Hey, there's this beautiful version of The Last of Us running on part two's engine
Right, so they've
that
done
will
it.
play much better than the original. Hey, come play our game."
Mm, yeah, so I'm still like a version earlier from the last time that I played it. So
Hmm.
my memory is going to be, fairly rough as far as the general events. I think I remember the opening the most.
Hmm.
Um, but as we get deeper into the story, you're probably going to have to be the one who's going to have to
Sure.
keep track of here's what's different because I just won't be able to remember that.
Hmm.
Uh, so I didn't remember when The Last of Us was set. It didn't even register with me that they changed the timeline, and it seems
Yeah.
to have no effect on the story. So,
Also, a lot of this is stuff I'm getting off of other podcasts because I have gone through the Last of Us podcast wormhole the last few
yeah.
days of watching all the different people review it. I've seen so many Easter eggs from this opening episode that I didn't catch. The movie that she picks out from the neighbor's house is a movie that Ellie brings up in part two. I would have
Hmm.
never connected those two, but that's what I'm loving about this is there's so much love everywhere. I just saw a video this morning where the birthday card in the game that you find, where she's
Hmm.
like, "Oh, I have to give this to my dad," is actually sitting on the table on the TV show. Never
Hmm.
mentioned, but it's just sitting there. And again, that's what I
Right.
like about all of the little Easter eggs you can get on there is then all the 9,000 YouTube videos you can go down on. Hey, did you miss this? And actually
Hmm.
with this, there's a lot of stuff
Oh,
that I
I bet. I
missed
mean,
for sure.
it feels like a show that's just absolutely jammed full of detail. They do such a good job on the world
Hmm.
building. And while I may not like recognize, like, okay, that's the exact card from the game or whatever,
Right.
I still just like the overall impression that I got from this whole thing is just, you know, stylistically, narratively, in every way, it feels like my memory of what that game was.
Hmm.
And that's a tremendous feat to me.
We've had several movies that we have covered. There's some that we still have not covered that also do this, where they're like, well, we're based on a video game and we want to give you the feel of the video game. We've not covered Doom on
Mhm.
this podcast yet, but they have a horrible sequence where they try to make it feel like Doom. There's other games that kind of do that same thing. Oh, we're doing first person views
Yeah.
because that's what we have in the game. None of them touch the driving sequence from this first episode of The Last of Us. That felt exactly like it did in the game, to the point of it's the same. I mean, obviously it's a better, it's a live version of the house burning down, but you see
Mhm.
that the signs are identical that you
Mhm.
pass. I remember an old Rooster Teeth video when the game first ever came out, because it's based in Austin, Texas, and that's where Rooster Teeth is from, that they went on a hunt to find that exact intersection in Austin, Texas. And I believe they
Mhm.
did. It's been, again, 10 years now since the game came out, but just that whole driving sequence felt exactly like the game, but it didn't feel forced and it didn't feel awkward like every other adaptation has ever done.
Right, I mean, in the Doom movie,
Yeah.
the thing that makes it not work is that basically it's Doom with God mode on. It's a character who's been powered up
Hmm.
to such a degree that there just is not even any kind of drama or suspense to it anymore. Whereas this is, it's the most memorable. I mean, everybody I think who played Last of Us like has this sequence in their head of exactly what happens from kind of the point where Tommy and Joel meet up until
Hmm.
his daughter getting shot by the soldier, and that stuff is just so one to one
Hmm.
perfect. But also, that video game. I mean, Last of Us the game, that whole sequence, super cinematic. Yes, it's
Yeah.
putting you in it. It's putting you in the driver's seat kind of, but it still feels like a movie more than a video game, and
Yeah.
it's not really you're not directly controlling it
Hmm.
very much. There's kind of a minimal amount of input. It's really a spectacle. So it's
Hmm.
something that, with if you want it makes sense that it translates so well. It's
Hmm.
something that feels like it was always meant to just be a movie sequence. But even leading up to that, what I really enjoyed, and this is something that you judge a lot of zombie movies on. I mean, I think the Dawn of the Dead remake, probably still one of Zack Snyder's best movies, is renowned for this as well, which is just the way that it subtly, gradually does the build up for the outbreak, where you
Hmm.
can tell, like there is just early on there's just 2, cop cars that
Right.
just, are going by the house, their sirens on, and maybe an ambulance, I don't remember. But, right away, you're like, "Okay, something's going on." And then you find out that, some guy at a bar is making trouble and Tommy had to punch him out, and now we have to bail Tommy out of jail, which, by the way, Tommy's introduction, very well done.
Hmm.
Also, as far as, like, you know, getting who that character is immediately.
Hmm.
But, you know, up until the old neighbor lady, zombieing out, there are all just these little things
Right.
along the way that didn't happen in the video game, but are just such a good, like, oh no, there's something horrible is happening in the background already, and we don't know what it is yet.
Hmm. Yeah. Remind me
Uh,
later. I want to talk about Tommy a little bit more once we get into the more present time of this first episode.
oh
But yeah,
sure.
I love the grandma like getting taken over that you see in the background, and her whole mouth opening up as the cordyceps or whatever take over while you're
Hmm.
looking for the movie. And I thought that was done extremely well. Like you said, hearing the radio talk about different things, and not just, oh, something terrible's happening, but just then Joel and Tommy are like, well, where is that at? And they're thinking it's a full country, and
Hmm.
Sarah has to correct them that it's a capital, and it does a really good job of just the little tweaks here and there, just to kind of remind you, hey, things are starting to take place, which is kind of
Hmm.
what happens in real life too. It's you something bad will happen, and you kind of will start
Oh
hearing
sure.
things, and
I mean,
it's
Shaun
like,
of the Dead does a great job of that too, right? Where just kind of zombie stuff is just happening in the
yeah.
background, and our main character is oblivious to it.
All right, because I want to get to obviously the Sarah scene, and get into basically the second half of this episode. But I want to bring
Hmm.
up the opening real quick. So we haven't touched
Hmm.
on that. What did you think of like that 1960s TV talk show where they basically just sit down and go, okay, this is how our zombies work, and this is
Mhm,
how it breaks down, but we're going to do it in a way of just a scientist going, well, this could happen, and the sad thing is, it can happen. But what did you
mhm.
think of that opening?
Oh, I thought it was really good. I'm glad you reminded me of that. Kind of forgot about that. But yeah, it's it makes me think of nowadays we like to go back to old news footage or old kind of statements from scientists in the 60s or 70s or 80s who we think predicted things.
Hmm.
Like look at this interview from the 60s and
Right.
how much they already knew about what was possible with this pandemic now. So that feels very much in line with that of
Hmm.
like, hey, here's this old recovered news footage that like, hey, somebody 50, 60 years ago called it,
Hmm.
or
Or The
I thought it
Simpsons
was well
did. One of
done.
the two. It's either a
Yeah.
scientist or The Simpsons.
Right, it's either, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, that there should have been, I wish there'd been a Simpsons clip they could have pulled.
Right.
But it was nice. Also, I like John Hannah. It was nice seeing John Hannah, in the role as that
Hmm.
scientist. I enjoyed seeing him again. Glad he's getting
Hmm.
work.
Yeah,
Um,
I liked it. I thought they did a good job of just okay, because I know if I remember right in the game, it's after the Sarah death, they just start throwing news stuff at you, which kind of breaks down exactly what happens. I think doing it at the very beginning works out pretty well, and they do a good job with that. So then let's jump
you're right.
forward
They're
again.
front loading the premise. Yeah,
Yeah.
as you say.
So then let's get to the Sarah death scene, which I thought was absolutely beautifully done. I do like, and again, just one of those things that I remember from the game. They do
Hmm.
a little fake out for gamers, which nobody that's played the game would get. But in the game, there's a truck that comes up and runs into you, and that's what flips the car over,
Hmm.
and that's what really starts that next chase sequence. With this, the truck shows up and it stops,
Hmm.
and then as a plane crashing because you get a better explosion that way that helps flip the car. And they still get that explosion. I know in the game it's a gas station that blows up, so it was just another cool little
Okay. Yeah.
moment,
Okay.
and
So
a
that
little.
is different.
It's like if you remember it, and then as
Mm.
we moved it here, and if not, then it doesn't change anything. But getting to that Sarah death, I thought it was absolutely beautifully done. I do wish, with so many lines taken from the game and
Hmm.
so many conversations going word for word that we had in the original game, one critique I have seen that I kind of agree with is I do, and it's so nitpicky and it doesn't take anything from this episode, but I
Hmm.
do wish the one line that the officer did not say in the show about, but she's just a girl. It's like I think that would have really hit the officer, like going, I really don't want to do this, but I'm getting ordered because we're just killing
Hmm.
everybody. Him just saying, three or four times or
Hmm.
whatever, I think missed that little bit of a punch, but I'll tell you right now, I cried, I think, even more from the show than I did in the video game, and I knew it was coming.
It's one of those things where I don't have an issue with it just because things that you may have to mention or that work better in a video game just because you have digitized
Hmm.
characters. Not that the virtual acting in The Last of Us is not excellent,
Hmm.
but you can convey so much more with just acting. Just I mean, I guess he was wearing a mask, so I guess
Yeah.
it's not like we could see his face or anything. But just from the tone of his voice, just from the performance, it was so obvious what the conversation on the other end was
Right.
that I didn't feel like you needed to have it be explicit to have him, like call out because
Right.
that line just feels like something like you got to have it so that you understand what the conversation is, and I think they
Hmm.
probably just realized they didn't need it.
Right. But what did
So
you think of the death? Did it hit you?
I mean, it works a lot better in this than in. I mean, it worked great in the game, obviously, but here because. Sarah as a point of view character at the beginning, and we as the audience are meant to identify with her and what she's doing for like the first 20-30 minutes of the show. um it's almost like the Psycho effect. I don't know, spoilers for Psycho here, ancient
Hmm.
movie. But Janet Leigh's character in Psycho, she's the protagonist for like the first 30 minutes up until she gets stabbed in the shower, and you don't really see it coming. So I think if you're just a regular television viewer who is not familiar with the
Hmm.
story of The Last of Us, that would be pretty impactful and shocking, just because it would be a genuine kind of gut punch surprise. So that's one thing where, like, knowing what was coming, I was like, "Yep, that's exactly like in the game. They're really well done." But I think for a new viewer, someone who's coming in entirely fresh, that sequence would be even better.
Hmm. Yeah, that's why. I mean, I know my mom barely knows anything about the game. She was surprised by that moment from
Hmm.
the little bit I've talked to her about it. Yeah, I would like to know from people that haven't played the games what they thought of that opening sequence, having no idea what was coming. Hopefully, your video game friends had stayed quiet and had not spoiled it for you. So then we jump forward the 20 years, just like in the game, but again, it pushes it to present tense. And we see a kid out there in the wasteland showing up, and they check him, and I think it does a really good job of showing the way that they test to see if you are infected or not. It's a similar situation in the game, but obviously not with a kid. He is
Yes,
tested
little
positive.
hand scanner that
Yeah,
turns green or red.
yeah. It shows that he's infected. They do this whole, oh, we're gonna take care of you. We're gonna fix this. We're gonna have all this food and all these toys. And then it flashes forward to Joel picking him up out of a garbage can because they, or not garbage can, garbage truck, because they
Hmm.
killed him.
Yeah.
And just that moment of, okay, you see the shoes, which I think is a great job of showing just how desolate and horrible this place has become, where it's like, well, we're gonna try to be nice to this kid, but we still got to kill him because he's infected, and there's no fixing it right now.
Yeah, I mean, you see what a terrible place it is. Just
Hmm.
the show leans, I think, more into the military regime than the
Hmm.
video game does. Even, like, I don't remember hangings at the start of
I
the
don't.
Last of Us game, or
There
maybe they
were
did.
they lined him up and shot him once
Okay.
because they like
There
lined him up and they were testing them, and then, oh, we got a live one, and then they shot him or whatever. But there
Okay,
was no. I don't
okay.
think there were any hangings.
Yeah, it definitely felt like it was leaning a little bit more into, like, look at this horrible
Hmm.
authoritarian, government as a way to establish, this is who we're opposing on the Firefly side once you get to the Fireflies.
Right. And I think it kind of just shows you where Joel has been for 20 years after losing his daughter, because
Mhm,
the person that's with him could not pick up the kid and was shocked by it, and Joel just like whatever, picks up the body, throws him in the fire, and
mhm.
moves on. Though I don't know if you know this. I only know it because I have listened to the HBO podcast which they have out there that
Okay.
Troy Baker hosts,
Mhm.
who is the voice of Joel in the video games. They had the two directors on the first episode at least, so it's really cool to hear Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann talk about the process in the episode. But from what they revealed on that podcast, that was supposed to be the end of episode one. Would
Uh,
you have been okay with that stopping right there for the
you mean
first episode of Joel tossing the kid in the fire?
that's an so is it that that was the point in the story, or was it that that scene was supposed to happen
No,
later?
that was just supposed to be where I think we were supposed to get 10 episodes because we only get 9 now. But that
Mhm.
was supposed to be the end of episode 1 right there.
Yeah, I mean, it would have worked for me, I think,
Mhm.
but it does going up until the point where he and Ellie team up, it makes sense, right? It's a
Mhm.
natural. You've established the characters and the fact that they're going to go on this journey and what the premise is. So you're kind of you would end in a way that feels, I guess, more open, or
Mhm.
like you don't really know what the show is yet at that point, other than
Right.
tragic stuff happened to this guy.
Mhm.
But going back to the hanging, the thing about the hanging is they weren't taking out infected. You know, these were people who were being executed for the now capital punishment crime of leaving the city,
Right.
and we learn early on that Joel is a runner, basically, who leaves the city to do jobs for people and stuff. So we know right away that he's taking this just tremendous risk where if he's ever caught, they're just going
Mm-hmm.
to execute him.
Right.
So I thought that was a good thing to establish. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I feel like we haven't really gotten at that point. How much Ellie have we had? We've
We
just had her
we would have
sitting
had
in
no Ellie yet.
no
Yeah,
Ellie
Ellie
yet.
would have
Okay,
been
so
after
Ellie will be
that.
episode 2. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. I mean, I guess it could work. It makes sense to have an 80-minute pilot.
Yeah,
It's not like
and
that's
it
not
works
a
out.
thing that yeah.
I do think that's what they said too. Is they wanted to get Ellie in. They might. I think he had even said they might have thrown that the first time you see Ellie being chained up, kind of as maybe even a after credit thing. I forget what they said, or if that would have
Mhm.
been the final shot of her being chained up to the thing, just to show you that character. But again, for those that have never seen
Yeah,
the
it
show,
wouldn't
they're
mean
like,
anything to you if you didn't
"Why do
know
we
who
care
she
about this
was.
person?"
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
but yeah, so then we get kind of into what we get into with the game, and we follow. Actually, what we don't see in the game is Tess actually dealing with some of the other underbelly of this city in Boston, and I can't remember that guy's name.
Mhm.
That she is trying to chase and trying to make the deal. But that's where I want to get into. The big change that they made is in the video game, Tess and Joel are trying to get weapons.
Mhm.
For
He's just
what?
trying to get a battery.
Who knows? In the movie, they're trying to get a battery because Joel wants to get to Wyoming to get to his brother. And
Mhm.
that's where I want to bring up Tommy again. Tommy is much more involved with this first episode and the main plot of this story, and Joel
Mhm.
going, I have to get to my brother, instead of in the games, we see Tommy at the beginning and then we just think he's dead after the 20 years because he
Yeah.
just barely ever gets mentioned, if ever. And then all of a sudden he's like, yeah, my brother is in Wyoming and we're going to drive by him. So let's just stop here.
Yeah, well,
And
Druckmann's
so
got
I
the
like
gift
it
of
a lot more.
yeah, he's got the gift of hindsight a little bit,
Hmm.
knowing that Tommy becomes an important character in the second game
Hmm.
that, maybe we should establish they're obviously already thinking ahead for, where the show is going to go in another season or two.
Hmm.
So it makes sense to spend much more time on establishing this stuff. I mean, with Tess, we just kind of saw the aftermath in the game. I think she comes back kind of beaten
Yep.
up, and she's got that conversation with Joel.
Hmm.
Whereas here we see her confrontation with the guy who cheated her out of, like, she paid for this battery. They didn't give her a battery. Instead, they just kind of beat her up. And she's just trying to get out of there alive now. She's like, okay, let's just call it even. I don't care that you cheated me. Like, you've already beaten the crap out of me. Like, just let me go and we'll call it quits,
Hmm.
kind of thing. And they go for it, which goes to show that, like, Tess is high charisma stats, good sweet talker, convincing
Hmm.
people. Um, Also, it's Anna. One thing, just speaking of Tess, so happy to see Anna Torv again. I'm a big Anna Torv fan, going back to Fringe, and she hasn't been in very much. I mean, we of course all as gamers know her as the protagonist of Heavenly Sword. I know whoever
Hmm.
played Heavenly Sword, but just really, really happy to see her again. So I'm hoping for a lot more Tess, even though I know Tess is not going to come with.
Right. You like to
But
see a lot more tests for the 2 episodes she'll be a part of.
yeah, well, we'll get more tests next week, but then I guess she'll be out of the story for a while. We'll see. I just really like her, like seeing her and things. So, um, what was your point about them changing it from guns to a
I
battery?
just think it made more sense because
Mm,
I think in the game they're like, oh, we need guns, and then, well, instead of guns, here's a kid. Now take the kid up there and stuff. And now with the way they changed it was, hey, you want a battery? We have cars in
hmm
at this place, and Joel even says it in the show where the Fireflies drive all over the place in this country, so they have cars that work, and that those vehicles will get us much farther than any chinky battery, which ended up being a dead battery and
hmm
anyways. But so that is him going, you know what? If I just go do this run, I'm going to have a far better chance to get to Tommy than I had before. Again, in the game, it was just all right, we take the kid up here and we'll get a couple guns.
I mean,
I
assume
think
that
it
he
more
was
more
running those
impactful,
guns, right? Like, they just needed to
probably.
sell the guns for money to live.
Sell guns for the coupons or whatever,
Right.
rations and all that stuff. Speaking of rations, they do something in the show also that's nowhere in the game, where we see Joel have the conversation with one of the officers there and gives him drugs and kind of shows his impact. And I love that scene just for
Mhm.
what we saw at the end of the episode to show
Mhm.
Joel snapping there for a little bit. Again, this beginning section of the show is just so much better than
Mhm.
how it is put in through the game, because they don't have to deal with, here's your tutorial, this is how you walk, this is how you aim, this is how we're going to do the listening mechanic. We don't have to deal with any of that stuff. We're just
Mhm.
going to give you even more story than what we were able to give you, and it just nails all of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually taking advantage of the format which it is in,
Mm-hmm.
which most video game adaptations just don't. They
Mm-hmm.
have no idea how they want to translate, what kind of story can we even pull out of this? And I know people like you and I kept saying there's so many games with great cinematic stories that would translate perfectly that you're not
Mm-hmm.
touching, right? Like, where's my full throttle, video game, or whatever. They were going to make the Monkey Island movie became Pirates of the Caribbean. They kept repurposing
Oh,
the
really?
Pirates of the Caribbean. Yeah.
Nice.
So it's like it's almost happened a couple of times. Or I was briefly excited. I thought BioShock could have been good. Is BioShock
Right.
still happening in some form?
There are so many movies out there. I know Metal Gear Solid was rumored for years and years. BioShock's been rumored for years. But you know what we are getting?
What?
Gran Turismo.
Oh
Why?
yeah. I've.
But because
I mean,
the story in Gran Turismo's been fantastic.
well, you just take any racing. That's the thing. You just take any racing movie and slap the Gran Turismo name on it.
Mm-hmm.
It's got a large enough car selection, you could probably apply it to pretty much anything.
Yeah,
Uh,
from what I've seen, they're taking an interesting twist to that movie. That's a
okay,
whole
I've
different
not
thing, and
seen anything. I
maybe we
think
will get
BioShock
to.
may be a limited series now or something.
That honestly, that's where video games need to go. That have the good stories. I've heard rumors of God of War maybe being an Amazon product and it
Yeah,
being in a TV show for that. So
because video games.
it's worked much better, I think, for video games to be in TV formats. We see that with Netflix and more the animated stuff with the League of Legends characters and stuff. But
Well, video game stories are generally more episodic and longer.
mm-hmm,
They're usually broken into chapters or episodes.
mm-hmm,
You spend 20 hours on one of them. It just makes a lot more sense to translate that into television than to try
mm-hmm,
and cram it into a 90-minute, 2 hour whatever movie. Um, and that has allowed them to really build on The Last of Us so
mm-hmm,
far. So, all right, we're about to meet the Fireflies now. You've already kind of spoken to
mm-hmm,
the Fireflies, but one thing that was, and I've always had a little bit of an issue with this chunk of the game. Everything kind of leading up to Joel taking Ellie in is a
mm-hmm,
little bit confusing. There is something happens outside. We're spending a lot of that time from Ellie's point of view. And then the leader of the Fireflies is injured, and there's a Mexican standoff briefly, and Joel is pointing his gun at everybody. And then eventually they convince him to take this job. But I don't, whatever the inciting, it's all a little bit muddy of what was actually happening
mm-hmm. Are we
out
talking
there.
about in the game or in the movie or in the show?
In both, I thought that
Oh yeah.
the series reproduced the confusion that I had with that
Okay.
section of the game
Yeah,
really
the
well.
the game, from what I remember, it was, again, you're trying to find the weapons and you're going after the guy Robert, I think was the guy's name. Um, and you're going after him to try to get the guns. You meet up with him. I think you kill him in the game,
Hmm.
or you're standing over him ready to kill him. I think you do finish him off. And then Marlene is there, and then she's like, "Well, I have guns, but if you want my guns, then you
Hmm.
have to take this girl
But what
up there."
happened? What happened to Marlene? Was I just not paying attention? Who shot Marlene?
She gets shot at some point in the game, or is just injured when you meet her, so she can't
Yeah,
make
she's
the
just
trip.
injured already.
Yeah. In the show, I think they do a better job because the standoff that you have with Robert in the game is a standoff that Marlene has, and she gets injured in that standoff with him.
Mm,
And you show
right.
up, and Marlene is now they tie it together better because in the show Tess talks about, well, he sold that battery underneath us and sold it to someone else, and it was Marlene who had bought the battery, and then because the battery was shit, she's then they get into a shoot off out of it, and that's where she gets shot, and her little partner has her ears shot off, which I thought that was a
Mhm.
funny line in the show. But I agree, it's a weird place of, I need a battery. Well, I have a child. Okay, I'll take the child where you need to go. And it's still a little just thrown in there to send them on their adventure.
Mhm.
Um, but I don't know. There's a lot of movies or classic movies that kind of have that same thing. It's where it's
Oh,
like,
it's
well, we need to get to the meat of our story. So here we have
mhm.
a great beginning and we have a great meat. Well, how do we make the two connect? I don't know. We'll just throw something together.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Uh, Definitely, a weaker section, but
Yeah.
again, it was the same way in the game, so I just
Hmm.
like, "Oh, yeah, you've adapted this the way that I
Hmm.
remember it." And it's probably not exactly the same, but,
Yeah.
um,
They
you
change
know
things, and I think it works out okay. But I agree. It was one of the just, especially when you really want to dive into the 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 whys of everything. It's a little weak for sure.
mm. But yeah, and the one thing that the show is not shy about foreshadowing is what's going on with Ellie and why Ellie is important.
Hmm.
I don't know if the game got to this quickly, as far as like, and, they make a big point with those scanners that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Like those scanners, they have to have a big fat square colored readout that can be
Hmm.
like, a big green or a big red so that the camera can pick up easily,
Right.
like whether someone is positive or negative. It's just a very good, as far as like, props that are more designed to be cinematic than to be what you would actually probably use in real life.
Hmm. Yeah,
Uh,
they touch on the conversations with Ellie and Marlene don't
mhm.
happen in the game, so I think they do a much better job. The fact that they name dropped Riley,
Yeah,
which is
yeah.
it's so good because I'm pretty sure we're getting a full episode of
Just
Ellie and
about Riley.
Riley. And if you've never played the game, I won't spoil it, but there's it's a DLC part of the game that came
Mhm.
out later, and we're gonna touch on all of that in, I believe, a full episode later on down the road.
That'd
So
be
just
really
name
cool.
dropping Riley was great. We didn't get any of that kind of stuff in the game. It was just,
Mhm.
you have to take this kid, and then you take the kid. Ellie does get scanned in the game, and then you take
And
out
and
the
comes up, positive?
yeah, and then you
Okay.
take them out, and then actually in the game it's a lot more upfront. And I'm pretty sure that's how we're going to start episode 2
Mhm.
is Joel and Tess confronting Ellie about it, because
Mhm.
we see that trailer, or see part of it in the trailer about them confronting her and kind of
Okay.
making a joke out of it. But they do it interesting where it's kind of off to the side. We're focused on Joel and his mental breakdown and punching the guard to death, and it's in the
Mhm.
background where Tess is like picking up the scanner and seeing it's red, and you see Ellie showing her arm, and you
Mhm.
can kind of hear the conversation. In the game, it's very right up in your face and upfront about it, but it can be maybe a little confusing for somebody that doesn't know.
I don't know, I thought it
But
was maybe actually too, like, I didn't remember them getting into it that early in the game, so I
mhm,
was like, "Wow, they're really," they're showing the scar, they're showing that she's positive, like, they are really telling us that she is
mhm.
immune immediately.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm pretty sure it's at that same moment in the
okay,
game. It's
okay.
as you're getting ready to leave Boston
Yeah, I
and
thought it was
stuff.
more of a later revelation, but it's just
Gotcha.
been too long. It's just been
Right.
too long.
For sure. So, before we wrap up, I
Mhm.
just quick overall thoughts on the actors in this
Yeah.
first episode. Obviously, most of them we're going to see many times over, but what are your initial thoughts of their adaptations of these characters?
Yeah, I don't really have an issue with anybody. Um, Let me IMDb this really quick just so I've got
Mhm.
everybody's names because
Yeah.
obviously, Pedro Pascal, we know and love from a million billion things at this point.
Mhm,
Um, Bella Ramsey, her name was on the tip of my tongue. I couldn't think of it. Obviously we know her from Game of Thrones,
mhm.
um, where she was very good and kind of she was like the tiny child badass who has to
Yes.
who has to rise to power much sooner than she probably would have if it wasn't an emergency.
Again, one thing real quick from watching all these podcasts or listening to all these podcasts and
Uh-huh.
stuff, one thing I completely forgot. I knew both of them were in Game of Thrones. I
Hmm.
forgot both of them got squished.
Oh yeah, so yeah,
they
Pedro's
both
eyes
had
gets.
they both had squishy deaths in that
I,
show.
oh, she dies in. I don't remember.
Oh well, spoilers for the final season.
I don't remember her character dying in Game of Thrones, but I've admittedly, I think I've blocked out season
the,
8 of
the,
Game of
the
Thrones
last
from my,
season.
just like don't want to think about it. Doesn't exist.
Honestly, from what I remember of her death, it happens in the big scene where the Ice King ends up dying right at the end. So it just
Oh,
kind of
okay.
gets
Hmm.
thrown out there. It's not a memorable death for
Mm.
Bella Ramsey, but she does get squished.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, she's a good Ellie. She's playing Ellie really well
Mhm.
so far.
She
Pedro.
she plays a angrier Ellie.
Hmm.
She throws cuss words out all over the place, and I love it.
Well, yeah, it's an HBO show. We can do that
Yeah,
here.
I think honestly that the everyone got all upset about the character change from Ellie in part one of the games to part two
Uh huh.
after a certain thing happens in part two. And they're like, oh, what a character change. It's not going to be as much of a character change for
I
the way
don't.
Bella Ramsey is playing Ellie right now. And that
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
she's
she
more
seems.
angry.
Well, I mean, but understandably so, right? Like she's being just kind of held against her
Right.
will and moved around, but she has no control over her life right now. So
Mhm.
I can understand the
Oh yeah,
lashing
I
out.
love it. I'm
Uh,
really liking her adaptation of it.
hmm Yeah, it makes perfect sense. She doesn't obviously. Everybody wanted. Oh, what's his name now? Elliot. Uh, Gosh, the character that Ellie was originally supposedly modeled after, that everybody thought she looked like.
Oh
Page,
yeah,
Elliot
Elliot
Page,
Page. Yeah, that's right.
um, or somebody who looked like Elliot Page, and she doesn't look quite like the
No.
Ellie of the game. So that's, but
Mhm.
neither does Pedro does not look like Joel.
Right.
So they're close enough as
Yeah.
far as looking like the characters. Performance wise, I think they're both 100% on point.
Mhm.
No complaints. Um, Same thing. Love Anna Torv in this.
Mhm. She
Let's
was great.
see who else. I like John Hannah in the prologue. I
Mhm.
don't. Nobody else really jumped out at me.
We haven't
I
seen
get.
a lot of Marlene from what is her name? Meryl Dandridge. That's
Yeah.
always an interesting story because Meryl Dandridge played Marlene in the game. She's the only
Hmm.
actor from the game that is back playing her original role. Obviously, we're
Hmm.
going to see Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson in the show playing different characters, more side stuff. But I thought from what we saw from Marlene was good, which makes sense because it's the same person playing it,
Hmm.
but we just don't see a ton from her. Anna Torv was fantastic, getting a few extra scenes than what we saw in the game. I think everyone's just nailing it so far. It's been
Yeah,
great.
I also really like, and I don't think I've seen him in other stuff, but Gabriel Luna as Tommy, he embodied Tommy really well.
Mm-hmm.
Like at no point, he just kind of, yep, that's Tommy. That's how Tommy looks and acts. So I thought he was well cast. I don't really know him from stuff. He's in those recent Terminator movies, but I don't
Yeah, I
really
was
know very
looking
much
through
more.
his stuff right now, and there's not much that I'm like, oh yeah, I've seen that. So
Yeah. Um. Yeah. Most not a cast which I'm familiar with. I'm
mhm.
outside of. I guess we're going to get to see Nick Offerman later, which I'm looking
Yeah,
forward to.
yeah, I believe he gets a whole episode himself. It's going to be interesting because obviously this runtime, as you said, for the first episode, a
Uh-huh.
little longer bit over an hour. We have some episodes that are like 40 minutes, and there's just not a lot of time we're going to hit. I know we're going to have, like you said, the Nick Offerman episode, and it's going to be a more a deeper dive into Bill, who we will meet from the game. We're going to have a deeper dive into him and basically the guy that he was living with throughout the whole situation, and dive into that a bit more. So it'll be interesting to see how he plays off Bill. Because
Are you
Nick
to what
Offerman is more of a Joker than I think Bill is, so it'll be interesting to see how he plays him.
Well, I've seen Nick Offerman play quite a few serious roles. Like he's in a lot of stuff now. Like I just saw him in Pam and Tommy not too long ago. Like he's getting around as a, though I guess he's kind of funny in Pam and Tommy as well. But he's making the rounds as a serious actor too, and I'm sure he has the chops. I just really like him. So I'm looking forward to that. But you think they're going to greatly expand on the material? You think that we're going to get
I think it's been said by people that are part of the show that they dive into it a lot more. And there's actually a scene, I don't know if you watched the after credit trailer. It's not an end credit scene, but it's basically this season on The Last of Us kind of.
Oh yeah, I'm not going to watch. I'm absolutely not watching any trailers or any.
It makes sense. I'm usually I shy away from that stuff, but I'm like, I know what happens in The Last of Us.
Sure, but I still want to be surprised.
But they have shown
by how
a couple
adapt
times where you see Bill in situations that were not part of the game. So,
are you expecting like? I could see them doing what Lost used to do, where they would spend an episode every now and then on like, here is a character flashback, and where you're now going to spend 40 minutes with this character 10 years earlier.
I think we're going to get that with Bill and with Nick Offerman, and I think that's what we're going to get with basically what was the Left Behind DLC with Riley and Ellie.
Right,
I think that's going to be an episode in itself. Again, not to spoil what happens in the game, where the DLC happened a couple years after the game came out, but then if you get the remastered version, or I'm going to guess
they put it
part
in
1 version, they set it in a certain spot in the game, and I'm sure that's exactly when we will get it in the show run too. I am still a little sad we're only getting 9 episodes. I think they could dive into even more. But with where they got to in this first episode, I don't think anything's going to feel too crazily rushed.
9 episodes sounds completely reasonable as far as covering the first game. And do you think the end goal is that we end at where the first game ended with season 1?
I think so too. I think it'll be the whole first game. Then I get wondering if, because I with how popular this first episode was, where it was like the second greatest debut in HBO history, just behind House of Dragons, and apparently it's already caught up to House of Dragons with people getting word of it. There's like 10 million people that had watched it by Wednesday. With how popular it is so far, you got to think that HBO is going to want to bring it back. Do they go right into part 2 with season 2, or there's a whole timeline in between part 1 and part 2 that they can touch on if they want? And it also, how long will it take to make these things? This is where I'm trying to figure it out, because they have not come out completely and said that there will be a part 3 video game, though there were cliffhangers left at the end of part 2 that they could continue with. But now, do we get a Game of Thrones situation where the HBO series catches up with the games, and then the season 3 have things that we will see in part 3 of the game, but the game's not ready? So there's a lot of interesting things that we could see. And again, it depends on how long it takes to make these shows. If it'll be kind of like we got with Better Call Saul, where it's every other year we get a season, that would give
they've
them
got some time.
They would give them 4 years to come out with part 3 if they go, this is the first game, season 2 is the second game. So there's a lot of interesting things they can do after it, but I'm very excited to see where what they really focus on in the next 8 episodes of this.
I could see the second game being spread across 2 seasons,
That is also true.
though
They-
I don't know if anybody would really want that. I think they're gonna when they get to the second game, they'll have some tough choices to make in terms of
right.
adaptation
Yeah, there's
because, do you really
this is
wanna go
again,
there?
it's really fun for us to come back to chapter select at the movies when our very
Mhm.
first episode of chapter select was
With
The
Last
Last
of Us
of
Part
Us
2.
Part 2.
Mhm.
And while I know I liked it a lot more than you did, I do agree that there are some interesting timeline choices the way they put it in the games that I don't know if it would work as well in the show.
I think my problem with
So,
that game is just that it felt cynical and depressing, like, in a way that the first one didn't. Like, the first one had a kind of a, a divisive ending, but
mhm.
it was just the ending, right? It's not like the whole game was that.
Oh,
It
the whole
wasn't
game
just a
was go. I
so
mean, again, it's been a long time since you played it. The whole first game is depressing as hell,
sure, it's
for
bleak,
sure.
it's a zombie story, but it's
But
not
it
like
it does a really good job of you still have the innocence of Ellie that
yeah, there's still hope.
counteracts it. Yeah,
It's a game but the first one is a game about hope, and the second one is like
it's
hope is so far gone that, like,
yeah,
all we care about now is revenge, so
for sure. Uh,
it's I don't know. I don't know if it'll be interesting when we get to it. I don't know why
right,
I'm worried about, Last of Us 2 years in the future.
right, because that's what we
Um,
do. We have fun with it.
we're so far away from any of that.
So, my question. Let's just wrap this thing up.
Mhm,
Obviously, this is the first time we've ever done an episodic show.
mhm.
Are we going to rate every episode, or are we only going to rate at the end of the season? How would you like to do it?
That's a great question.
Because if we do it by episode, it gets really difficult. Because I absolutely love this episode, but
Mhm.
I don't know if I can give it a 10 because other episodes could be better.
But you're worried about okay, you just worried about the baseline being too high?
Yeah.
I don't know though. I think a great pilot, especially like a pilot is so hard. The pilot is
Mhm.
usually the worst episode of a show. You're introducing the world, introducing the characters. It's
Oh,
one
could
of the
you
more.
imagine if this was the worst episode of this season? What we are in store for?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Oh
exactly.
man.
I just think for a pilot of television, it's spectacular, and I would have no problem rating it a 10, even knowing that
Right. So let's
there'll
do that.
probably be
Let's go
other
ahead
episodes as
and
good.
and rate every episode. So maybe down the line, if we can
Hmm.
continue through this and we get to other seasons, we can have a rate of this is the best episode we've seen, or it's up there, and then we can rate the whole season as a whole as well. So would you give episode 1 a 10?
I would.
Nice.
I I also want to give some props before I forget to
Mhm.
the fact that they brought the original music back,
Ah,
which is something
that
that's so rare in video game adaptations. They never keep the theme music, and they did in this case. And of
it's a good
course,
song.
with that classic, the HBO, prestige opening titles.
Yeah, the Game of Thrones meets The Last of Us music is
Yeah, yeah.
really, really good.
I thought it's a great title sequence.
I
Anyway, how about? Mhm.
I can't blame you for a 10. But I'm just gonna hedge my bet. I'm gonna go 9.5.
Okay.
Just to hedge it just a little. I'm hoping that we have better episodes along the way, just from knowing what comes around
Okay.
in the game and what episodes I'm hoping hits best. But
So it's not that you have a small niggle that is taking a point
no,
five
it's
off. It's
just
just that you want to
I
keep
don't want to have to break our
the
system
ceiling. Hmm.
by the end of this season.
This one goes to 11.
Yeah. And who knows, we might still have to get to that point. And now I want to go back and adjust some of my scores because I feel like this is so much better than anything that we have
I
covered
don't know.
here on the show. But
I think Ace Attorney 8.5 still stands.
yeah, and I gave it an 8, so I saw some wiggle room. And that's the fun with these scales, anyways. It's different. It's a different feel. It's like Ace Attorney back then was like compared to the other dribble we've watched. I was surprised we didn't give that a 10 because again, that one nailed everything pretty well and hit the aesthetics of it and didn't take itself too seriously, which some of these video game movies try to do too much of.
Mhm.
But but yeah, so it's going to be a really fun journey and kind of spoiling ourselves a little bit for 2 months. I want to say we're
Yeah,
going to
before we
spoil
then
ourselves with good stuff before then we go back into we went through every Resident Evil movie from Paul W.S. Anderson. While we were away, there was
Mhm.
another Resident Evil movie that came out and a Resident Evil Netflix show.
I'm really glad that, we were not podcasting when this was going on, because I know you would have made me watch all that crap.
Oh, you still are, sir. Just because I have watched them both and enjoy them on different levels,
You do.
and neither of them are high levels.
Yeah, I've heard people who I trust have told me things about those Resident Evil shows and the movie that make me think it's
I like
not gonna be.
I like the Idris Elba Netflix series more than most.
Idris
However,
Elba?
or not. God, did that before too. Who was the guy that did it
Oh,
on
from
there?
he was in Fringe and, other
Yeah.
things.
Um.
Uh,
Crap. I
uh,
apologize to this actor now. But I had him in my head because he was on The Dark Tower,
Lance
and
Reddick.
thank you, Lance Reddick. The Lance Reddick version, more than most people, but it's not great. By no means am I saying it's a good adaptation, but I liked it more than most people did. We also have another Sonic movie that came out. We might have a third Sonic movie by the time we get to this kind of stuff because that's supposed to come out next year. There's a Mario movie coming out very
Alright, that
shortly.
Mario movie, I actually, while we're here, while we're talking about these things, I do need
Yes.
to get your take on the Mario movie trailers that we've seen so far.
And I am all in. It looks so
Okay.
good. It looks so good.
It does look so good.
Now, will it be good? Or is
But
it just going to be piles of nostalgia?
well,
That is going to be it. Have
I
we seen the best of this movie in the trailers?
mm,
That'll be the question.
so, um, there's just a lot of stuff that I recognize in those trailers from a variety, like the whole universe of Mario games.
Mhm.
You know, the only thing I still need to see like some more. You know, like I want to see the Sunshine. I want to see more stuff from Sunshine. But
Yeah.
it's been pretty amazing, just like the level of attention and detail that's been put into the world, just from those trailers.
Mhm.
And also using the music from the games for those
Yes.
sections
Mhm.
correctly. So I'm really looking forward to that. The big misstep and the thing that I was getting at, that I thought you might speak to, but I guess I'll have to pull it out of you,
Bring it.
is
Yeah.
Pratt. I hate him.
I'm not
I
as
hate him.
upset about Pratt. It's a voice. Everyone's like, "Oh, the Mario voice is wrong." It's like we barely ever hear Mario speak,
Yeah,
so
we
I don't
barely ever
really
hear
care
Mario,
that
but we
much.
all know what Mario sounds like.
Yeah, and just
And
because
the
he'll be
Pratt
a little
one,
bit different here, and
yeah, but
it
it's not
doesn't
just
bug
it's
me as
different. It's, you
much.
know, it's just like half-assed. It's basically just Chris Pratt's regular voice with like the
Oh yeah,
slightest bit of Mario,
oh yeah.
like the most minimal amount of
It
Mario that he could have put in.
it
And
will
then when
not
he
be
said,
good.
yeah, and it's a shame because I think everybody else really well cast. Anya Taylor Joy seems to, you know, she's just sounding like
Mhm,
herself, but that's fine for Princess Peach. You got Charlie Day, I think, a perfect Luigi. You know, the
mhm.
perfect casting for Luigi. Everybody's really well cast. Jack Black needs to put a little bit more sauce on it.
Yeah,
But you know, everybody's really well cast except for freaking Mario.
but Chris
I
Pratt is
don't understand it.
everywhere, and that's
I don't
just
understand it.
they're bringing in the name.
Like
But we'll get to that
when he
for
says
sure.
"Let's a go" in that trailer, like how bored does he sound? He
No, he
couldn't
was
sound
being
any more bored.
serious. He's like, "Let's go." As he's getting ready
Let's a
to
go.
do a Smash Brothers thing with Donkey Kong. I don't. We will find out in a few months when that movie comes out, and we
We'll
will
see. Could
have
it
that
be
review.
the first good Illumination movie?
What? Come on, that's rude.
Is it?
But I
Is
also
it?
have little kids, so we
I'm
get into
sorry.
those
I'm sorry that you're being
Illumination
subjected to
movies.
the despicable me's and secret liveses
Minions.
of petses and singses of this world.
I haven't got as much into the Sings. Secret Life of Pets were
No
Minions
story.
have been okay.
Minions have been okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I like the goofiness of the Minions. As long as it's one of those movies you turn your brain off and have
That's really
fun.
their version of the Grinch is appalling.
Yeah, my daughter really likes that version, and I'm not
Mm.
a fan. It's probably my least favorite of any of the Grinch stuff, but
Oh, that's a hard one because the Ron Howard one also exists, the live action one.
with Jim Carrey,
Yeah.
yeah, Jim Carrey makes that whole show. The rest is all right.
I'm not a Jim Carrey fan, as I think you know.
That's fair. That's fair. All right, we're completely off topic. We will be back
Mm,
next week with episode 2 of The Last of Us. Again, let us indulge for 2 months
exactly.
in good quality entertainment, and
We're
then
just gonna enjoy ourselves.
we will punish ourselves for your amusement. But
Well, I
thank you
think
so much.
the next movie I've got picked out will not be that punishing, but you'll see.
All right. Well, you do get the first pick when we come back to
Mm,
those. So
it's only right.
it'll be fun. All right. So that's Jens. My name is Randy. Thank you so much for hanging out with us on Chapter Select at the Movies. Let us know what you thought of this first episode, and we will be back for episode 2. Take care.